So this week, as Ash mentioned, we were down in Puerto Vallarta, and it got me thinking about safety because she was saying how safe she felt where we were staying. Now, where we were staying was in a fairly new-built building, that complex, that was behind a 10-foot wall with spikes on top. There was a gate, an iron gate, that you had to get into this complex. Then there was a second gate, iron gate, to get into the building, and then there was a third gate to get into our apartment. To add to the security, the woman said, "We leave the lights on the porch on all night because this adds extra security. Safe area." And so I got to thinking about that. So you walk out of what was a very nice, well-kept building into a street that was falling apart. Cobblestone streets that had huge potholes, sidewalks that were collapsing, buildings that, looked like, I don't know how much longer they got to be standing. And every once in a while, there'd be another gentrification project of a really nice building being built in the center of it. The closer you got to the beach, of course, the nicer it got. I wonder why they would fix up those buildings first. And so safety was a real interesting idea in an area that was just so disparate and relative in terms of the poverty I witnessed. And then the height of, people of hedonism on the beach. I don't know how else to put it, That's what we were there for. We were there to enjoy it. We had some great food. But I kept thinking about this idea of safety. And I kept thinking how throughout the ages it's been such a big deal and there's been such a disparity in terms of who feels safe and who doesn't and why. I have my son and his mother. They were in Asheville. I raised him in Asheville, and for 17 years I was there. And they were saying that when we got there, which is now 25, 30 years ago, they're safe from hurricanes because they're in a valley surrounded by two mountain ridges, right? Just surrounded by mountains. So how can a hurricane get in there? And plus, they're 8 hours drive inland. So what hurricane's going to make it there? And it turns out that hurricanes, which have in the past averaged about 230 miles in diameter, the one that hit Asheville was 850 miles in diameter. So they went from feeling very safe to, oh my God, in a heartbeat. And isn't that life? I mean, I don't know about you, but I felt very safe walking down by the river right up to the moment at which I slipped. As my son would say, feet went up in the air and went down onto a rock and cracked a rib. Then it didn't feel so safe. So how do we do that? What do we do with all that? I was reading this week about the horrific experience of kids in the U.S. who were adopted who are now being deported because they weren't made citizens. You're a little kid, you get adopted, you get brought into the country, you grow up into an adult, and all of a sudden you're told you're not a citizen and you're out. Where's the safety in that? And so where is the safety in that? Where do we find safety when in a second it can be like taken away, just like that? You know? The only place we can find it is in here. That's it. I was reading about how in the 50s and 60s, nobody in the U.S. ever locked their doors. Now everybody's locking their doors. Right? Back in the 70s, I was in a town called Cotati, California, really tiny town. I think there were 2,500 people on the population board when you entered Cotati. Nobody locked their doors. Nobody even took their keys out of their car. Everybody was just driving around doing whatever they wanted right up to the day somebody's car got stolen. And then all of a sudden, they didn't feel so safe anymore. Started locking their doors. Where do you find safety when it can change like that? This is what I've been thinking about, because we can keep trying to, and the thing about doing our best to make ourselves safe in the physical world, the odds are, the other side of the coin is it's making somebody else less safe. In the U.S., they keep closing the borders to make it safe, and yet it's making it unsafe for all these other people who have traveled so far to find safety. And I started wondering about that. I started thinking about, well, if it's happening out here where I can see it on that scale, it has to be happening here. We must be doing that too. And so people close their hearts to feel safe. And in doing so, anybody standing, if you've ever been around somebody with a closed heart, it feels very unsafe. Or am I the only one? And so that's what we're dealing with all the time, is somebody doing their best to make themselves safe, leaving somebody else who's like, what's going on here? I don't feel safe. And yet, what it comes down to is, how are we doing here? And we have these stories all the time about people who have found their safety, found their freedom, found their open heart in the midst of horrendous circumstances. Right? I speak to you about these all the time. Ananta Krante, Paul Ghiazza, these people who suffered and yet didn't, because they found their own center. And I'm not up here to say don't lock your doors and, don't take some precautions. I know the next time I go down the river, I'm going to take a little more precaution. So that's not the point here. The point here is, where have we gone? When do we get to the point at which we're actually disconnecting because of what we're trying to feel safe about? Because it's risky to connect. I mean, when I get up here every week, we talk about in class and everything else, we're all one, we're all one, we're all one. And then we go out into the world and it doesn't feel that way. It could be very quick to experience not feeling so much of that oneness that, maybe you get to experience a little bit of in here. I know I do. And then how do we take it out there? How do we take it into those experiences that don't feel safe? And I'm not saying be naive and walk down a dark alley where there's a gang hanging out waiting to stab you. Right? That isn't my point here. However, it does take some courage. It does take courage to stand up and go, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here, open my heart, be uncomfortable, and allow for a connection. after 3 divorces, and I don't know how many other relationships I've had besides that, it would have been really easy to go, I've had it. This is never going to work. I'm done. And it took it took courage for me to say, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to open. I'm going to risk my heart again. And maybe you've experienced times where you've been through something that just hurt like heck, really hurt deep down. Maybe you've lost somebody, right? Grieving. Grieving is a beautiful act of love. Unless it turns into something where you've made the decision to close down. Instead of open to the fact that you are grieving that deeply because you felt that deeply about what it is you lost. Whether it be a person, a pet, or whatever. You got to feel that deep. I get up here and I talk each week about being powerful, creative, spiritual beings who get to experience the fullness of life. Part of the fullness of life is loss. It's not all just, fun and gigglies. I mean, I wish it was. I'd like it better, maybe. I don't know. But then with the contrast, I get to see the hugeness of what's actually possible here. And I get to feel another layer of depth in myself. Leaving home is an adventure. Getting out of bed can feel like an adventure. And then you leave the house, and you're out in the world, and things happen. We got to see this show down in, when we were in Puerto Vallarta, we went and watched this show, which had a lot of acrobatics in it, no net. And so one of them was this guy who started out with simply a cylinder and a board. Put the cylinder on the board and he's balancing. He's like 3 inches off the ground, 5 inches off the ground. Okay, well then he puts down a table and he gets on top of the table and he does it. And then he puts down a second structure and he gets up on top of that. Now he's 15 feet up on the ground. I'm like, okay, but he's still doing the same thing. Then he has the cylinder, takes a second cylinder, puts it on top of that one standing up, takes a third cylinder, lies it across, takes a fourth cylinder, puts it on top of that, takes another cylinder, lines it across to that, and then gets up on top of that on a board. Now he's 20 feet above the ground with no net. And I kept thinking, that's taking a risk. Not what I'm going to take. But I watched him and I thought, how beautiful. And I know he didn't just get to that high. He built it up, did the whole thing. He got there step by step. And that's how you can open your hearts, step by step. You don't just go from standing on the ground to thinking you're going to do that. If you do, the odds of you falling and breaking your neck are pretty darn good. Right? So that isn't the key to how we grow in opening our hearts. How we grow in opening hearts is step by step. I go back to what they say in yoga, right? Go into your stretch, smile. If you can't smile, back off the stretch, right? So when we're opening our hearts, when we're taking a risk, when we're looking for that deeper connection, do it in bits, right? Because if you do it in bits, then you can feel that stretch, then you stretch a little more, then you stretch a little more. I'm sure that's how that guy got up there, was one step at a time, until all of a sudden we got to witness him 20 feet in the air doing this balancing thing, with no net, going, oh my God. That's quite the risk. But I am certain of how he got there was step by step, and that's what's possible. There was this other act. This guy is in this special chair with his feet in the air. And this woman, small woman, jumped on his legs, and he just threw her around like all over the place. Just throwing her, boom, 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 boom. And I'm looking at that, I'm going, man, does life feel like that sometimes or what? And I watched her, and I watched how beautiful it was when she was spinning and how she was feeling about it. And as I'm watching her, I'm going, yes, yes. She looked relaxed. She looked in full control of herself, not how she was being spun. He had all that power. He's just throwing her around, right? But she was like in so beautiful control. And I'm watching this and I'm going, yeah, life can feel like that kind of ride. And if we can breathe into it, if we can allow ourselves to relax through the turbulence of how life can feel, the experience we get to have in that can be extraordinary, even in the worst of times. I've been in touch with a lot of people in Asheville, and their experience of what happened is hugely different, depending not on the circumstance, because they got creamed, but on their consciousness around it. And through their consciousness, what they're able to create is something greater than those who are struggling, than those who are thinking this is the worst thing that ever happened. And we can go there, right? We can go into a situation and go, oh my God, this is just terrible. Or we can go, who am I going to be in this? Who am I going to be? I ask myself that question all the time. Who am I going to be in this now? I don't even care what the situation is. You know, if I'm reacting to a situation, the only thing I'm looking at is I'm reacting to this situation. I'm getting myself all up in a wad. It still happens. But now what? Troward, Thomas Troward, who was a man that taught, was one of Ernest Holmes' teachers, our founder, used to say that principle is not bound by precedent. Principle is not bound by precedent. Basically, if you're stuck in what happened last time, you're not in principle. If you're stuck in what happened last time, the best you're going to get is what happened last time. If you're talking about, thinking about, focused on what happened last time, that's as good as it gets. That the only way you get to experience something new is by opening to that possibility and not getting stuck in precedent. This is what's possible when we open our hearts, when we allow ourselves to grow into that stretch, so that when the turbulence of life comes along and you're being thrown around, you have the tools to breathe into it, to relax into it, to experience something greater. When you feel your heart closing down because it hurts so darn much, you have the tools to breathe into it, even if only a little for starters. That guy did not wind up 20 feet in the air, balancing on all those things from standing straight on the ground. He had to work at that. And so do we. To get to a place where the experiences, what's going on in life, can be something extraordinary for us. Ash and I, during COVID, found ourselves in our relationship. It turned out to be the greatest turning point that could have happened for us. We were stuck together in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, not going anywhere. And something about that drew out the best in us in a way that drew us together like glue. that may not have happened otherwise through something as horrific as COVID. There's just no telling what's possible, no matter what the circumstance, if you can open your heart, breathe into it, and use the principles we teach here of love, of awakening, of kindness, compassion. All these are possible when we're willing to risk our hearts, even just a little for starts. I love you all so much. Thank you.